talk about bodies and boundaries. So before we start, just want to get some feedback from all of you as you signed up to come to here. What are some of your expectations about what you feel like you might get out of this hour? Why are you here? What are you hoping to learn?
I'll tell you, protect our kids. I want to protect my
Use the
daughter.
mic.
I am here because I want to know how to protect my daughter.
Okay.
I think upon diagnosis, like, I don't know for those of you with boys rather than girls, but upon diagnosis with a little girl, that's like one of the first terrible things that enters your mind is like, oh my goodness, this child could be so easily taken advantage of, which of course has bigger ramifications for girls than boys.
Why do you feel it? Pregnancy. Okay. Yep. Abuse is abuse. Yep. What are you hoping to get out of this hour?
I'm here to support.
I'm here to support these wonderful panel members. And I know that they have a lot to share, and I'm very impressed and amazed at this session because it's one of the first. We haven't had a session like this at conference ever. So it's a great first step in raising awareness and putting this on our families' radars. And I'm happy to support and help any way that I can.
Thank you for a perfect segue. So I'm going to turn it over for a moment and then I'll introduce myself and then everybody else up here. But I wanted to turn it over to Naka and Ember because they were the ones who came up with this topic and thought it was important for us to present today. So I'll kick it to you guys, and you guys can tell the group and everybody online why you felt as parents this was the critical topic.
What do you want to hold up? Hi guys, I am Naka King. I am the administrator for the 215Q Alliance, but I'm also a parent to Rylan, who is 9. Ember and I had been working on a teen life session, and where we talked about appropriate sexual behaviors when your kids are turning teens. So I was like, let me do some research into that. And I started doing some research, and the statistics came up that 90% of those with intellectual disability, both male and female, will be sexually assaulted once. And I was like, what? Like, that's why we're not talking about this. Why do we not have things put in place for this? Like, that's terrifying. So I brought it to Ember, and she's like, yeah, what are we going to do about it? And then anytime we talk to anybody about it, everybody kind of shrivels up, right? You're like, sexual assault. And you're like, nope, not talking about it. That's not helping our kids either.
Thank you. So my name is Ember Burke. I am the communications coordinator for Duke 15Q Alliance. I also have a son, Brendan, who's 15 years old, who has duplication 15Q syndrome. Yeah, so when Naka brought this up to me, I almost hung up the phone on her. But again, it's one of those things that we don't want to talk about, but we need to talk about. So I'm actually really proud that we're opening this door to all of these communities. My son Brendan, he is nonverbal. He still struggles even with being able to communicate to us yes and no. He's had a lot of regression due to seizures, but you know, I have a list of things I feel like I'm always working on with Brendan. And I feel like I need to add this to the top of the list. That's where I feel like I'm at right now, because the reality of our life is Brendan will always need someone with him to take care of him, to toilet him, to feed him. So while this is a touchy topic, I, again, am very proud that we're beginning this conversation today.
Thank you. So where I come into play here is, so I am newly appointed COO for Project AP, but my background professionally is in clinical psychology. So, and I got, in my pursuit of my doctorate, did a track in forensic psychology, and in that work, and forensic psychology is not CSI. It's like, you know, forensic psychology is doing evaluations for the court to answer legal questions that have anything associated with any mental illness. Okay, so competence to stand trial, guilty but mentally ill, malingering, and then There's a whole other area of our criminal justice system that is specific to sexual abuse. And so I spent 7 years of my professional career doing assessments for victims and perpetrators of sexual abuse, and got to work with families on both sides. And so I have a pretty good understanding of this area. And it's not an easy topic to discuss, as you guys alluded to, for any family, for any family. So let's just put it out there. But I'd love to use this hour for us to discuss how we can empower you and your families, how we can recommend some practical interventions to keep your children safe and the children in your home safe. And we'll talk about that. Everybody else who lives in your home, we'll talk about that as well. And to answer any questions or demystify anything that comes to your mind. So it's, I want this to be as interactive as possible. Before we get started, I want to introduce Maya. Many of you had a chance to listen to Maya earlier this morning. Maya will spend a minute just introducing herself and how she can and will be of value to this group.
Thanks, Brett. So as I said this morning, I'm a social worker. I've worked in children's settings for a long time in pediatrics. I was trained in child protection. So I was trained in, intervening when kids came into the hospital who were abused or neglected in all sorts of ways. So I have that side to my training, but I've also worked with kids with chronic illnesses of all different kinds, from 0 to 21, well into adulthood. And I'm also very sensitive to the fact that for people with illnesses and disabilities, we stop thinking of those people as sexual beings. We stop thinking of those folks as physical beings. And we don't always talk about that aspect of their lives either. And so a flip side to our protection conversation is also thinking about, depending on where your loved one may be developmentally, what are the things that we do need to think about so that if they are having interactions, they're having healthy ones. So this is a really broad and complex conversation. I'm really glad to be here starting it with you today. And this is really a first step.
Thank you, Maya. And we also have here Hayley March, who you'll be hearing from later in the afternoon. But why don't you introduce yourself to this group?
Sounds good. My name is Hayley March. I'm also a social worker. My background has been experiences mainly clinical, with several hospital settings, case management roles, and a variety of different experiences. I was formerly a respite provider, as well as a therapeutic recreation counselor, both for children with genetic disorders that had comorbidities with mental and behavioral health conditions. My specialty is in trauma and mental health. So unfortunately, between the respite and the hospital, I have seen too many cases of various forms of abuse. And I am hoping to be here to help support you through this difficult conversation and in any way that I can. And I'm excited to be here to start promoting these conversations.
Okay, so let's put the cards on the table. This is a very difficult conversation. Okay. In fact, this conversation could trigger different things for different people sitting in this room. And while this is not therapy, this is not group therapy, this is not counseling, should you have any type of response to what we talk about, please pull us aside, myself, Maya, Hayley, anybody, and come talk to us, okay? And that's perfectly okay. Because this conversation can trigger some of those things. Want to talk to you a little bit, just so we have everybody's got different, attitudes and beliefs around sex and sexuality, sexual abuse. And so we wanted to put it out there what we're going to talk about today in this group. So we will talk about sexual abuse. We will talk about why individuals with disabilities are at an even greater risk. We'll talk about okay and not okay touching, the power of trust and access, which is going to be a big topic that we'll talk about. The challenges specific to our population, the people in this room, and then the most important thing that we'll talk about, and we'll spend the most time on are the steps that we can take in our homes where we have control and outside our homes where we have less control to mitigate the likelihood that our children are the victims of any type of untoward sexual behavior. Okay? I'd love for this to be a conversation and not a lecture. As I said at the outset of this, you know, everybody in this room and everybody participating online, we all come from unique families, backgrounds, experiences. We have, you know, different religious beliefs. We have different philosophical beliefs. Sex is a touchy topic. You know, I always think of like fight, flight response, right? Some people go right at it and other people avoid it. And I understand both. Okay, so my intention is not to make anybody feel uncomfortable, but to really start a real conversation on how we can keep people safe. My two representatives up here of you guys are going to grill me, I hope, and model the ability for you guys to grill me as well. And there's no, you know, it sounds cliche, no question is a dumb question. Okay, so please, whatever you're thinking, ask. If you don't feel comfortable asking in a public setting, pull me aside. I'm here all day, I'm here tomorrow, pull me aside. And I can help either answer the question for you or absolutely direct you to the resources that might be more applicable to your question. All right, let's just talk real quickly, and we won't spend much time on this, but about developmentally sexually appropriate behavior. Sexuality kind of starts before we're even born, okay? And there's, you know, the physiological piece of sexuality, there's the anatomical piece of sexuality, but there's also an emotional component to sexuality. And what I mean by that is, you know, I have an 8-year-old daughter, okay? When I look at her, I don't think about sex and sexuality, but I do see a young girl who requires feelings of being close to somebody, affection, intimacy, and all those things. And so sexuality and these topics, you know, are associated with feeling like and accepted, right? And so kids of all ages demonstrate those behaviors, and it's not like typically the way we think about those things, but we're going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation about how we have to be careful when we talk about boundaries and setting boundaries, whether they're explicit boundaries or implicit boundaries, around showing people affection and why it's important that we begin to teach our kids some boundaries around that and create boundaries for them around that, because there are some times where those behaviors can be misinterpreted by other people. So we'll talk about that as we go through here. All right, let's talk about some stats real quick, because I think this will set some context. And this is not meant to scare anybody here, okay? What we want to create here for the people sitting in this room and for the people participating online is healthy paranoia. I want to raise awareness, okay? I'll talk about stats, but what we know about the statistics around sexual abuse is they're probably a lot higher than what you see on the screen, okay? Because oftentimes disclosing abuse is a difficult process. That process becomes compounded even further when our kids have certain developmental disabilities or some cognitive delays. So when we talk about why this population is even at greater risk, it's because of some of those, you know, the complications. I put up there access, okay? So 93% of child victims of sexual abuse know their perpetrator. Now, when I talk about knowing your perpetrator, they have a relationship with the perpetrator has a relationship with the victim, okay? That's an astonishing number. Can anyone kind of guess why that number is what it is? Anyone want to take a guess?
Children don't want to hang out with a stranger. I guess I don't know.
don't know for sure how this relates to atypical children, but my typical children would not choose to be in a room with someone they didn't know. Yeah, yeah.
So these numbers, when I talk about 93% of child victims know their perpetrator, that is the general population. Okay. So what about that dynamic? And just take a guess. Why is that number so high?
Because of trust.
Trust, right? Trust is a big component of, unfortunately, of sexual abuse. Okay. When victims of abuse trust the perpetrator, it becomes that much more difficult to disclose as well. So when we talk about how can we protect our children, right? And we'll talk about some interventions, you know, we want you guys to be aware of some of these numbers. The other number I want to point out, which I feel a little uneasy, but I think it's important to point out, is our service providers. And who are the most likely to commit acts of sexual abuse against our children. And it's for the same reason. There's access and there's trust. And so we're going to talk about in a little bit how we assess who can we trust. How do we go individually go through that process on who we can trust out there. And then lastly, men, unfortunately, for us guys, we're much more likely to commit acts of sexual abuse versus women. Okay, that's just fact. All right, let's talk about some safety measures. So how can we protect our children? So I want to turn it to you guys real quick. And we had a very lively discussion probably a month ago now. And some of the questions that you started to ask me, I think were very important for the people in this room. Here.
So I guess when we first started having this conversation, you had suggested creating healthy boundaries within the home. And I was like, great, what does that look like? And you said something about never closing doors. And I was like, well, sometimes Ryland's napping or crying or whatever. And you made a comment about anybody that comes in the home, whether it's even siblings or cousins or grandparents, regardless of who it is, there's never a closed door policy. How do you tell your family members that you're putting that in place without them being like, what, you're accusing me of potentially doing that? And then that's not what you're doing, right? But you're trying to teach a habit, a correct boundary for your child and those around them.
I'm glad you started with that one. So what you're talking about is an explicit boundary, right? So just by show of hands here, how many people, when they're taking a shower, right, close the bathroom door in their homes? No one else is there, just your family, right? They close the bathroom door. How many people don't? Right. It doesn't. They start batting, mom, right? So this goes to my first point up here. Everybody's got different values, attitudes, and beliefs, right? And there's nothing inappropriate when you're home taking a shower about leaving. Maybe you have to leave a bathroom door open, right? But how do we start to model these behaviors in our home where doors are open or doors are never locked, right? So that's an explicit boundary that we can start to create in the home where we start to model privacy, right? And whether our children can really understand that, it becomes more of a message to the people, the other people in our homes. How many people here have other children, more than one kid? How many of those kids have friends over? How many times in those instances are those kids alone with a door shut? Like, we don't think about these things. Like, I'll give you a story. Last night, my son, 11 years old, my daughter, 8, okay, had a friend sleep over, and his little sister wanted to sleep down in the basement with the boys. And I'm not accusing my son of ever engaging in any sexually inappropriate behavior. And I'm certainly not accusing the friend he had sleep over, but that wasn't permitted, right? So we're starting to implement implicit boundaries around those relationships. Okay. So that's one thing that we can do. And then Naka, can you, was it Ember, you or Naka, who, when you talked about how many people here are working from home now since COVID? Okay. So we talked about that there's care providers in our homes, you know, throughout the day, and that we're working, and how do we know exactly what they're doing? So talk about some of the challenges first, and maybe some potential interventions with that.
Yeah, so, you know, I've been working from home, and Brendan has been in and out of school, all of our kids. It's been obviously quite challenging with our keeping a somewhat of a routine. But one thing that I've had is I've had to have more hours for respite in my home. Brendan needs assistance toileting. He, you know, is in the pull-up. And when we were talking about this, you know, again, he needs help with everything. So I do trust these people that come in our home, but I do know the reality is that I really don't, I'm not a mind reader. I don't know really what these people are thinking or feeling deep down sometimes. And it just got me thinking about all the toileting that I am trusting these people entering our home, feeding my child, toiling my child, sometimes in a bathroom with the door closed. And I got a little pit in my stomach when we were talking about this, you know? So one thing that Brett recommended was that toiling, you know, with some, you know, someone who's toiling Brendan outside of myself or my husband, it would only have to happen on the first floor. And honestly, only in an open space now. Like, it's really gotten me thinking more, because one of his respite workers will, you know, and it's hard because I want to give Brendan that privacy, right? So it's a fine line in that balance. Like, I want him to understand, yes, toileting is done in a bathroom, but the reality is I want to be able to him to be in more of an open space, right? With monitoring.
Yeah,
Correct.
so I think you raise a
Yep.
great point, right? And so there's this conflict. We want all of our kids to feel as independent as they can be, but we also want to protect them, right? And so there's almost these competing demands. So in your instance, I think, and Brendan deserves the privacy that we all deserve when we use the bathroom, right? The difference is that he, you know, someone has to go into the bathroom with him, but I still believe that he deserves that privacy. When you're, come on, come back with me.
This is what our conversations have been at this past. He'd be like, you should do this. And I'd be like, that's not going to work in my house. So what's your better suggestion? So yes, we want to monitor everything, but we are only human. We are doing everything 24/7 all the time. There's complete burnout. So where do we build that trust, right? Because you say it's about trust. How does she trust her respite worker so that she doesn't have to monitor everything that's happening 24/7? Because people need people, and we definitely need people to support us.
Without question. So I don't want to give you the textbook to answer, right? Because there has to be a realistic application to this, right? So we could go down like, here are the basic recommendations, but thank you for pushing back. And I encourage all of you to push back on me. And I might not have all the answers, okay? But we can learn together. And this is an ongoing conversation, okay? My one thing I'd want to point back to you is, yes, you can't be everywhere omnipresent, right? There are limitations to what all of you can do. Totally get it. In the instance of the example with Brendan, with a working mother who has people in her home helping her son sometimes use the bathroom, which is a very intimate thing. We can't get around that. One of the things that we talked about was having the door closed, but having the worker take Brendan to the bathroom on the same floor that either mom and dad are on. Okay. That just adds a little bit of a deeper level of oversight and accountability. The other thing that we talked about, which I thought was interesting, is letting your care workers know, disclosing that you have cameras in your home. Okay. And you're not doing it in an accusatory way. You're doing it in a respectful way, in a transparent way. You're not telling them they're sexually, they're, pedophiles, right? You're telling them that because my child requires so much, we have cameras in each one of our rooms in the home. Okay. And that just adds a little bit, again, level of oversight that might make somebody who might have bad intentions. And most people don't, guys. Most people don't have bad intentions, but there are enough who do. And there are enough who do, who put themselves in positions to get access to vulnerable children. That's just a sobering fact. And I'm not accusing, just let me be clear here, I'm not accusing any worker out there of anything untoward. I'm just talking to you based on experience and based on literature and research of there are certain people out there who will put themselves in certain positions and in certain roles to gain access to children. So hang on one sec, we have a question from the audience.
How do we put limits on when they're not in our hands and we're not at home with them and at school?
Thank you. We are gonna talk about that, but yeah, but great question. So at home, right, you guys have, and I know we're busy, right? And I know you guys are, you're working, you have other children, you have spouses, you have the normal stresses of life. And then you're responsible for providing a very high level of care for your affected child. So that's just the reality of it. And I wish I had a magic bullet that alleviated that responsibility off you guys in this room, but I don't, because supervision and oversight is going to always fall on parents. And we're going to talk and address your question in the next part of our discussion is, so at home, we have control, right? There's things that we can do at home to ensure that our children are safe. When we get outside of our home, we have less control, and we'll talk about that. But I want to just wrap up this discussion on the home stuff. Yep.
So a lot of the things that we had talked about, and I think it's important to point out, because as we were having these conversations, I was like, okay, what can I do in my home that changes our family dynamic, that protects Rylan, so she doesn't mimic these behaviors in public? And so a lot of the things that I think about, Rylan's 9, she's got a little brother who's 5, and we'll have friends over and we'll be in the pool and things. And like one time we were in the pool and she started pooping in the pool and we're like, no. So we're like grabbing her out of the pool and we're stripping her in the yard. And it didn't even make me think, right? Because you're just like, I got to clean this up. We got to get everything. But there were people there. And it didn't even dawn on me that I'm almost teaching her that it's okay to just derobe in front of everybody if you have to change something. And so I've been trying to be very aware of those things that I'm doing in her care around others, like teaching her that, or even like we'll be in the bathroom trying to go to the bathroom and the door's open and her brother comes in. Obviously we're family and there's nothing happening, but I'm teaching her it's okay that people are coming into the bathroom with us. And that's the things that I think you were trying to put home, is giving them that privacy, modeling that behavior, so that if it was ever in a situation outside of the home, she knows I'm not going to take off my clothes in the middle of the water park because I pooped, or things like that. Did you have anything else that he had talked about at home that you would change? Because there was a lot of great conversation, and I know we didn't touch on it here, but a lot of that would go into outside of the home.
So we've been planning this for, I don't know, 6 weeks. We've had weekly calls, which I've really enjoyed. It's not the most enjoyable topic, but if we can keep kids more safe, I'll do this, 7 days a week. One of the things that we talked about, and you pushed back on me a little bit, which I appreciated, was, when I think of sexual abuse and safety, okay, I look at it from both sides of the aisle. Okay. So I worked with an adolescent population who engaged in or perpetrated in sexually inappropriate behavior. Okay. And so when we first hear that, we think, oh my God, what a horrible kid, right? I don't know the percentage of kids, but I evaluated, I don't know, a couple hundred of them. Most of them weren't bad kids. Most of them weren't pedophiles, of course, okay? Most of the kids that I evaluated were curious. They were curious. You know, we have to understand that it's okay to be curious about sex and sexuality, right? It's okay. Satisfying that curiosity becomes, you know, a little bit more challenging to do it in a developmentally appropriate way. Okay. Whole lot of factors there. Peer relationships, acceptance, confidence, like all those things. And now these kids grow up in an era where if you Google right now the word sex and you hit videos, lots of things are going to come up. So kids are exposed to these things at so much more of an early age, and it sparks curiosity. There's nothing we can do about that. And for some kids, they don't have access to developmentally, sexually, you know, age appropriate peers, or they don't know how to access them. So when we talk about family and family dynamics and our affected kids and our non-affected kids, there's a lot of people living in our homes. There's a lot of friends that come over. My recommendation to everybody here is start putting your foot down. Doors are always open, okay, in our house. When you have your friends over, doors are open. I don't care if teenagers like their privacy. Tough, you know what. Keep the doors open. That's something that we can do. For your kids who are not affected, how much are we monitoring, right? With still enabling them to be independent. How much are we monitoring what they're viewing on the computer? What conversations are we having with our children about sex and sexuality? These are not easy things to do, but you know, we're trying to keep the whole house safe. We're trying to keep everybody who comes into your homes safe. And most importantly, we're trying to keep these kids safe because a lot of these kids cannot advocate for themselves. They can't advocate for themselves physically, can't push somebody away. They might not be able to say no. And they might not be able to communicate to you that something bad happened. So we have to protect them. We are responsible for protecting everybody who comes into our home. And and I don't think you have to be everywhere in your home. I don't think you can be everywhere in your home. But just simple things about people on different floors, doors being open, when we use bathrooms, they're shut. When we come out of the shower, we have towels around us, right? When we change, we make sure we change people in private. These are the implicit messages around boundaries and people's privacy that we can set and send every single day.
So a few just additions as far as safety in the home and risk and protection from a respite provider's perspective is how many of your caretakers, respite providers, friends that are entering the homes have cell phones on them and are on cell phones. I have unfortunately worked with someone who got in big trouble because the family came home. The daughter was running out naked from the bathroom because he was struggling to get her clothes on, and she, wiggled away, and they walked in on him taking a photo of her. So one thing that was recommended now by the agency that I had worked for is having conversations with the parents, and they're promoting educating parents to have cell phone conversations about, if you're allowed to take a picture of the child at all, and what your boundaries are as far as that. And another consideration with younger children, that
Now we're working, I think. It's a good transition into affection, right? How many people here like to show affection to the people they love? How many people don't? No, I'm kidding. How many people find it gratifying when our children, all of our children, are able to show affection towards other people that they love? How many of you encourage your children to show affection towards other people? Okay. How many of your affected children do you encourage to show affection towards other people? Is there anybody that you block your child from? So if I pass your child, I don't, know you guys, very well. If I pass you guys in the hallway today and your child wants to give me a hug, what do you do? As parents, what are you going to do? You're going to stop them. Stop. Right. I like that. Yep.
I mean, like, sorry, she'll just go, who's that? And most of our care worker, they're female, so it's like right on their breast, right? And so we're like towards the shoulder. And so we're just trying to train her to like touch a shoulder. She's just pointing like me to them, but it's, trying to modify her behavior too. And then get the person to not be like, why is she touching my breast? But,
Right.
which is awkward.
I love that. I love high fives.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else maybe not stop their kid from hugging somebody?
I don't know if you saw my child yesterday hugging and
I
kissing
did not.
everyone that she could get her hands on.
And so as a parent, what
It's hard here.
It's hard here.
Because she's with peers and she's like, oh, sugar, you're so cute. And she kisses them. But I'm recognizing that it's not going to be so cute. Like she's going to be 15 and she actually really loves older gentlemen. So they have gray hair. She thinks of her grandfather and she loves them. And she will try to kiss every single one of them. So we're trying to do high fives. The thing is that the older gentlemen usually like, oh, you're so sweet. And they're
Yeah.
encouraging it. And I'm like, no. Because when she's 15, you're not going to think it's so sweet either. Right. And so we're trying to do high fives, but it's really hard because our kids are so dang sweet. And I
They-
just love it.
they are, right? And it is sweet. And we know that it is sweet giving somebody a hug, right? But you better know them, right? But I think the important point I want to make here, when we talk about affection and your child giving people affection and making sure that the person that they're giving affection to is somebody that they know, right? and is somebody, that they trust, is because, again, I'm not trying to scare anybody here, but there are certain people out there, acquaintances, right? We look at that stat, who are going to completely look at that behavior in an inviting way. I can't tell you how many evaluations I did where the person sitting across the table from me who engaged in sexually abusive behavior thought that they were doing something kind and affectionate towards the child because the child was affectionate towards them. And that's just the reality. We all of us in this room distort information, right? To make it fit into the narrative or the lens that we have. It makes us human, right? People who represent what somebody else is doing and look at it as an imitation that exists out there. So we don't want your child to walk around to be fearful. We don't want you guys to be fearful. We just want everybody in this room and everybody online to be aware, right? Question.
Who do you limit the hugs and kisses, hello and goodbye to?
Does anyone want to give the answer? Hold on, because the online people.
We focus ours to close friends and family members only. If it's a friend that comes over once in a while, it's kind of no touch, stay away from them, not in a negative way, but just they don't have the relationship. But with our daughter's peers and their parents, we promote it because it helps with her social engagement.
Or I would say those that have given permission for affection, right? I mean, if your child's coming up, it's like you need to ask before you hug, or you need to, and that also gives you, as especially if somebody's always with them, right? To be like, that might not be the person, we don't know them, but they don't want to do that, like encourage, you can block, I guess, than that by just having the child learn to somehow ask or initiate or cue you to ask or whatever.
And I love the word that you use, because you can cognitively block, right? And for some of our kids, we may have to physically block. So I like that word block. Okay. I think that's great.
I think with us, Margaret's somewhat social and loves those hugs and kisses, but other times she's very abrasive and or does not want it at all. And so we never force it upon her. If she doesn't want to hug grandpa, we don't hug grandpa. We just wait and say goodbye. It's time to go. So I think this is showing that importance of letting them express themselves. If they're not comfortable or they don't want to hug, don't say, well, you have to.
Recommendation for all of our kids, right? I think thank you for sharing that. So I think I don't think there's a playbook. I think you as a parent, you are the best evaluator. But I would say that, just from a basic fundamental, I would recommend that your child's not physically interacting with somebody that you don't feel comfortable with, and that you make that decision.
Luckily. But like, his teacher is a male. A lot of the paras are female, but he'll always go in for a kiss with everybody. And luckily people turn their cheek or whatever, but I guess I just need to physically say no kisses, just hugs.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about outside the home. It isn't it.
We were thinking from up here that we should actually jump to the outside the home stuff, just so
Okay,
we don't run out of
we'll
time.
get there. But
So thank you for bringing that up.
I want to address one more. Great. Right. Yeah. Yes. And that's where safety is a multifaceted approach. Great point. I think it's really important. I'd love to dig into that a little bit more on some things that we can look for in others, but you hit on a really important point that I'd love to talk to you offline about later, but continuing this conversation in the future, I think is really important. So at the urging of my colleagues up here, thank you very much. Sometimes I get lost in these conversations. We are going to go. So we talked about in-home, right, where we have control. And now we'll talk about, all of our kids probably go to school and leave the safe nest of our home. If I can change this slide, maybe not. Maybe I'll ask my great IT people to help me out. Guys, can you change the slide manually there? Not that my slides are any good, but okay. So safety outside the home. So as our kids get older, or as they pursue their education, they're gonna leave us, right? They're gonna leave our little nest, right? So what can we do? So by show of hands here, how many people have kids who are affected in school right now, whether it's for the day, whatever it is? Okay. How many of those people who raised their hand have talked to their school about a safety plan around boundaries? You have. Oh, love it. Can you tell were you willing to tell the audience what conversation you had?
So we have guidelines in place about 2 people in the bathroom. There's no independent bathroom changing. We also do greeting protocols, because he'll be a grown man someday, and high fives, hugging, touching the body, none of that. It's handshaking or waving hello. That's it. So we do no touching, and we're not affectionate as a family either, because personally, I think that crosses over because they spend so much absorption time in the home, and especially when the learning curve is so low and long. Handshaking, hello, 2 people in the bathroom, no cameras, no monitoring, heavy notations. The diapers that I send, I want to see what comes back. So we're monitoring all of those details. Food is another one, because he can store food and save things in his pockets. Leave it in his pockets. I will dig in his pockets. You do not dig in his pockets, and you don't teach him that it's okay for adults to dig in his pockets. So you keep your hands off of him. You're here to teach him things. You're not here to touch his body.
Wonderful. And I love what the school's doing. So kudos to that school around bathroom safety. Yep.
I just wanted to add too that most schools that I've found don't have those policies in place, and you actually have to let them know in the IEP that you specifically want a witness. Unfortunately, we learned the hard way. But I just have to stress that and really, I mean, you shouldn't have to say, please don't physically hurt my child in an IEP, but you do have to be specific, and always, if there's a para taking your child to the bathroom, always have them get a witness. There should never be a reason, as well as, my child tends to get dysregulated in the classroom. And the paras have to leave the general ed classroom with her and go to SSN. Well, the SSN teacher's like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be in the classroom. So now they have to find, a place to take my daughter. But my concern is when they leave that classroom, nobody knows that she's on the way to general, or that she's on her way back to SSN. So even leaving the classroom to go somewhere else within the school, just having somebody always aware of where your child is and having a witness to where they are. So in the school system, they have subs that pop in, and I've helped in functional academics, and I'm a previous educator, so I understand how that realm works. But I know there's a child on the playground, and she got all muddy, and they asked me, and they said, hey, will you go in and help her get cleaned up and change her? And I'm like, well, here I am, the sub. I don't know her IEP at all. And yet I'm left in charge of this student. And there was another little girl that I was told to take her to the bathroom, and later I found out like she was a Prader-Willi child. They didn't tell me this, but I figured it out because she was starting to eat things. And it's like, well, I need to, as a sub, we need to be aware of these things so that we can keep these children protected and, you know, take care of them. But how do we tell our school systems these subs need to have an idea of these IEPs if they're working with kids with special needs, so they know how to adapt and react, I guess, if they see a behavior, so they don't react in the wrong way? Because it's HIPAA violation to share.
Yep. Sure. Add, and then Nick, I want to go to you because we talked about this. I love involving everybody.
Hey, yeah.
I'm going to see if the IT guy.
As I break my camera. My girlfriend's got a special needs kid who has autism and Asperger's. He's on the spectrum, and he basically hugs everybody. And so that was his thing. He would constantly walk around when he was in high school. He's graduated now, but he would, you know, hug everybody. And the school knew that he was special needs and he was in some of the programs, but I guess he hugged somebody that didn't want to be hugged, and they literally wanted to bring charges against him, which was a huge thing. And she was like up in arms about it because she didn't, you know, they were trying to inform the school that he does this, and they had a huge issue about him constantly being affectionate to everybody he sees. And it was a big thing that, you know, they had to bring the parents in and explain everything. And so anyway, that was something I wanted to share too, but it was really hard for her to go through that.
Thank you very much. And I wish it wasn't 11:55 and we weren't on a clock, because you raise a very important issue. And that's when I talk about safety. Safety is both ways, right? Safety is protecting our kids from being victimized and protecting our kids from doing something or putting their hands on somebody, right, who is not going to take kind to that behavior. And a parent, I've seen it, and parents pressing charges, right, criminal charges or juvenile charges, right? And now there's mitigating factors, but we've got to keep all of our kids safe. Okay. The school thing, real quick before we wrap up, and I know do we have any Q&A questions online? And if we do, I will personally address each one of those questions. No, okay. Well, if anyone online has any questions, you can direct them to me. I'll email you back or hop on a call. But from a school perspective, right? If you go to your school, board meetings, right? Getting other parents involved. All of our kids are at risk. That's why I put those stats up there, right? Obviously, kids with developmental disabilities and moreover, even kids with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities are at more risk, but all of our kids are at risk. The numbers are staggering. I think 1 in 5 women will be sexually abused in her lifetime. A little bit less, the odds are a little bit more for boys, but all of our kids are at risk. So if you go to your school board and you start talking about safety plans around this, it's not just about kids with developmental disabilities or kids with disability, right? It's all of our kids. So that's a way to get other parents alert to this issue and put it on the school. Every kid has a right to a free and fair education, but they also have a right to safety. All of our kids. So I think you can get support from the other parents in the school system and go to your board meetings, advocate for this. And if they tell you anything about background checks, I won't use a bad word here, but they don't mean you know what. They only mean anything if you've gotten caught in your life. We pick up a newspaper. We've seen individuals who have been perpetrating sexual abuse and have been getting it away with it for years. So background checks to me, whatever. So talk to your school about safety plans. Talk to your school about supervision in bathrooms. I love that I hear, 2 schools that are doing that. I think it's really important. Yeah. No, go. I want to hear from you. I talk enough.
Sorry. What kinds of things are flags when we're interviewing caregivers?
So you guys are not trained psychologists. There's no prototype of person who sexually offends. I think it's the more you know somebody and the more time that you spend with them, the more you can trust them. But we can't rush time. Okay. And I think it's really important that you can do what you can do, and you can provide the oversight that is needed. But when our kids see so many different service providers and they leave jobs all, it's like they're entitled, right? And so many of these people are coming in and out of your child's life. And
Brett, can I chime in?
yeah, please.
Briefly, I just want to dovetail off, I'm feeling what you're feeling right now. And it just reminded me of a situation that we had with my son, Brendan, probably about 4 years ago. There was a male respite worker that liked to bring Brendan out a lot, and which I love that he's going out into the community. But I'll never, ever forget this. My Brendan is nonverbal, but as he was walking to this gentleman's car, he looked at me, Brendan looked back at me, and I just, as a mother, had this gut feeling, right? And I feel like we have to, kind of focus on that a little bit, and I didn't have any proof of anything. But there was just a look in Brendan's eyes. And I'm telling you, we did not have him work with Brendan after that day, so just those, obviously Brendan's nonverbal, a lot of our children are, but just those little signs, I think, that is a form of communication. We know our kids best, and we just have to try to use our best judgment at all times. So I don't think there is a true answer to your question, unfortunately. But
And I'm thinking about the other part of our conversation, and Brett, you had this with us too, when we might talk about sort of signs and symptoms to look for in a typical kid. You might think about things that you might notice in terms of behavior change or certain things that they're doing, which is much harder in your kids, right? There may not be things to pick up on in the way that we might pick up on in a typical child.
Yeah. So just to pick, and I want to get to you, and I know we're past time, but I don't really care. Some of the signs and symptoms of kids who have experienced sexual abuse are, regression in behavior, isolation, fear, bedwetting, loss of appetite. And so when I sit in this conference and I hear all the complications, it's like, oh, they have that. And that doesn't mean that they are sexually. So the differential, you guys, yeah, all of those, right? So don't drive yourself crazy, right? And I think, so I,
people that we already know or come with a referral,
yeah.
But there's other, you can help, and you're just interviewing cold so much. And I usually don't leave them alone. I usually don't leave, I'm there in the house, for a while till we build trust, I guess. But I guess that's just because you're right, they run a background check, but that's not going to show me anything.
No.
So I guess, it's going on your gut a little bit, but I'm kind of wondering if there's, I don't know, patterns of behavior, things they might ask or do, or something where may seem completely innocent, like taking them out. They're like, oh, we want to go out and go outings. That wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but it was a worry.
Right.
You know what I mean? Are there things like that, things that we could be picking up on?
So would it be bad to ask you to not track their phone, but you know how you can do find my phone, find my friend. Is it okay to ask your worker to, that's not going to tell you anything, but at least they're going to the destination.
Right. Yeah.
I know you had a question. I want to get to you.
I'd be real fast, but I was going to say the same thing she said about totally trusting your gut. You could totally not hire someone because it does not feel good.
Definitely.
Number two, you can ask for their references and call those previous people that they worked with and ask the questions of how did they interact with your kid? Did they take him out on outing? Things like that. And totally call those people, all the references, every single one, all the things. Number three, use your providers and bring them in, and you can say, have them in the room for a little bit, and then, or give them an email beforehand and say, hey, I'm bringing my care provider. Can you just fill them out a little bit for me? And then send them out with your kid and say, okay, what'd you think? Like, I think using your team to like feel them out a little bit is also a good thing, to
Yep.
like use your professionals in your lives to like gauge people
Yep.
sometimes as well, and say, how did you feel about our professional, and engage them. Can you ask them some questions about things, and then use your professionals in your life too to use that, because I think that's helpful too, to gauge your team
Yep.
in that way. And questions on interviews there, if you Google interviews for people in my home, if you interview that or Google that, MS Society has some on people for your home, and there's a few other ones. If you Google what to ask people when interviewing for your home, there's some out there for you on
I
resources.
love that. And the last thing I'll add here, and then we do have to wrap, is talk to these people that you know what's up, that you know you've attended things like this, and that you're very aware of the problems, and how should we, you service provider and me, address that. Put them on notice that you know. Put them on notice that you're aware of the stats. Put them on notice that, you know, your child's safety is the most important thing. And these are some of the things that I do in my home to ensure my kid's safety. So that will create a little bit of resistance there if your kid was to ever come in contact with somebody who, okay. So I think that's, get it out there, talk to them about it. I think it's important.
I just want to add that myself and Brett are working with Down Syndrome of Louisville and some other great resources, creating a coalition around this subject to create educational pieces, as well as pushing legislation to put some more strict policies around this in schools, as well as just as if somebody gets caught, a lot of our kids can't take stand to talk about it. So we need to change that. And so there's going to be more educational pieces, webinars and things like that coming out from a group who knows more than we do, but we know it needs to be addressed.
And just the other piece, we didn't get to do it before the session, but we will make sure it is in the agenda and in your app, is that we have a whole list of resources for information, both about kids with disabilities and the statistics and the things we don't like, but there's also the American Academy of Pediatrics every few years updates their policy on sort of issues around sexuality for kids and teens with disabilities. They literally came out with the newest one 3 days ago. So you will have that link. It's really fascinating to read. It's the scary stuff, but also the good stuff about educating, all the different ways we can educate our children. There are a lot of books out there primarily geared to kids with autism, kids with Down syndrome. Not all of it is as applicable for kids who are nonverbal, but it's a place for you to start to get ideas, to see how are other families handling things. So one of our tasks this afternoon will be to make sure those resources are available so you can grab them down after we're out of this room.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I love the participation. I hope that you all found this. I know it's scary and it's uncomfortable to talk about, but I hope you took something away from this conversation, and it should be a conversation that we continue to have through the commission and through each one of the alliances. And, you know, our goal for this discussion is to keep people safe. So thank you very much. Thanks.